Alrighty, let's see here. Good morning, folks. How is everybody? Take care of a few little technical things here. All right. Well, everybody, we are going to be all right. Welcome, folks. Today, I'm going to start building a bookcase, specifically the bookcase from the Anarchist design book. It is a very simple, straightforward design, and it's one of those things where, hold on, there we go. It's a simple design. One might call it boarded furniture because boards really just nailed together using mostly house joints. And by that I mean dados and grooves. The dados house all the shelves. There's a groove for the back panel. There's a series of grooves that make up the shiplap backboards. It's all a very efficient design and something that could be built relatively quickly. So this was something that was born out of a couple of folks in the hand tool school community. They were talking about needing bookcases, and suddenly it turned into this group build. And everybody's saying, hey, I want to build along, I want to build along. And it was decided upon this particular design. I like the design. Why not? It should be a lot of fun. So I'm going to do this hopefully in just 3 parts. I'm going to stream for about an hour, maybe 90 minutes at most today. And we're going to work on not only talking a little bit about the stock selection, but breaking the stock down into basic sizes, gluing up panels, and then I'll finish by sizing those parts to their final dimension and talk a little bit about how to get consistent sizes. In this particular case, it's a case piece, right? So a lot of times keeping things square is really important, and some of that comes down to having consistent sizes because you have pairs. You have 2 case sides. They need to be the same size, and the joinery needs to be located in the same place, or you get shelves that are all funky. Same thing with the shelves. They need to be all the same size and all the same width and the same thickness so that they fit into those dados. So there's a lot of consistency and a lot of repetition. So ideally, in between my streams, I'll be kind of dealing with the repetition. I've done a little bit of work ahead of time just so that I can kind of show some stuff that's already been done. But I think the important thing is to first take a look at the stock. Now, this case eventually will be painted. I'm going to paint the exterior of it with milk paint. I'm going to do the interior with some sort of clear coat, probably shellac or something along that line. So I chose pine. The original design in Schwarz's book is in pine. I think it's keeping with the general, shall we say, design idiom. It's every man's furniture. You know, we're not going to use exotic, heavy hardwoods for this. We're going to use what's available. Now, one quick kind of technical note. I've got the chat room up over on the side, and if you guys have questions, by all means, pipe up, chime in, throw out your questions. I will be getting to them. I'm going to kind of take breaks here and there and address the chat room in between working. So don't be afraid to ask questions, folks. I'd love to hear from you. So I chose pine, and I didn't even choose like premium cream of the crop type pine. This is just big box store stuff. I've often gone and bought radiata pine from Home Depot, which is just perfectly clear, beautiful stuff imported from New Zealand. It's nice, but it's a little bit more expensive. This I actually bought from Lowe's, and I went and I looked at their like premium rack, and I was looking at the prices going, well, let's go down and look at like the mid-grade. They were about, I don't know, a couple bucks to $5 cheaper per board, and frankly, yeah, there were knots here and there, but it really wasn't that big of a deal. So what I'm doing when I look at this, here's a 1x8, and there's a couple of knots along one side, a couple of knots on the other side, but this edge is totally clear of knots. This edge does have a knot on one side, but I know I'm going to need to glue up a panel for this. So I've got one edge that's clear of knots that'll make it easier to plane and give me a better glue joint. So I don't really care that there are knots in the interior of the board, and if there are knots on the edges, if they're checks or anything like that, I think about the parts that I need and can I saw around that. 9 times out of 10, you can saw around that. But here's the thing about buying lumber from the big box store, and this is going to sound a little weird because I work at a lumber yard, and you would think, go to the lumber yard. And generally, my thoughts are go to a lumber yard. You're going to get better quality stuff there. Really good quality pine is actually really expensive. Most of the pine out there is not being sold in rough sawn material, so it ends up being quite a bit more expensive sometimes than even cherry, certainly more expensive than poplar, because so much of it is sold in lower grades. It's sold to the big box stores, used for framing material, even used for core and plywood. So it's one of those things where if you're going to buy pine, you might actually find a better deal and sometimes even better quality from the big box store. One of the advantages from the big box store certainly is it comes S4S. Now that can be a disadvantage as well. I'll talk about why it's an advantage in just a second. But they often will sell it in a variety of lengths. So this is a 6-foot long 1x6. These are 8-footers. Sorry, this is a 6-footer, and then I've got 8-footers. They also had 10-footers, and in some sizes they had 12-footers. And what you need to think about here is what are my multiples for my project? My case sides are approximately 48 inches. My shelves are approximately 36 inches. So as I'm buying parts for the case side, if I buy an 8-foot board, I know 48 and 48, I can get 2 case sides out of it. If I buy a 10-foot board, I'm going to get 2 case sides and this little 2-foot offcut that's not going to be usable for anything. Likewise, if I bought a 6-foot, I could get 1 case side and then another 2-foot scrap that I can't do anything with. That's just wasted material. So you need to think about, sometimes it's just going in and we're looking for nice, clear, flat boards and not necessarily thinking about what parts to get out of that. Likewise, there were some 10-foot boards that looked really beautiful, and I started looking through them and I started to buy them, and it occurred to me, well, what can I do here? I can't get 3 shelf parts out of it. I can get 2 shelf parts and maybe a case side, but I might be running into some problems where the saw kerf is cutting things down and it's not giving me a lot of room to play with. So I ended up buying a single 1x6 that's 6 feet long. This is going to comprise the back rail at the top of the case. It's going to comprise the kicker, which is at the bottom of the case. You see the plan, the drawing over there on the left. I bought 2 6-foot long 1x8s because I can cut this in half, glue them together to make a single shelf. Again, if I bought an 8-footer there, I'd end up with a 2-foot offcut. It was just ridiculous. So 3 1x8s, 6 foot. Then I got 2 1x8 8-footers. I can cut this in half, glue it together to get a panel, and get my case side. And then finally, I need parts for the shiplap back. And this is kind of, you can use scrap that's lying around. They don't all have to be the same consistent thickness, or you can make them the same thickness, but you're probably going to need like 1x10s to get the same thickness. Or you may get away with 1x8s. I actually kind of like a little varied width in my shiplap. I don't know, it just kind of looks cool. It kind of keeps you guessing a little bit. So I've got some material that I will have a little bit of left over from a scrap pile that I might use, but there were these great 1x10s in 8-foot lengths. And my shiplap back, if I remember correctly, they're about 43 inches long. So again, round up to 4 feet. If I get an 8-foot board, I can get 2 pieces out of this. So I'm actually going to use these wide boards for my shiplap back. I'll end up having to cut 1 or 2, depending on how it looks, rip 2 of them down a little bit narrower in order to fit things in. But I'm not too worried about those sizes yet. I'll dimension those relatively once we have the case put together. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and take these 1x10s, just set them over there, get them out of the way a little bit. And I'll this board first. Now the next thing I did for this design I built a story stick. And this story stick, you can make story sticks as complex as you want. My personal philosophy is make them as simple but informative. So I will always write my parts list on the back. I've labeled it and what this is. That's always nice. 10 years from now, I'll look at this and go, what the heck? What am I building here? So I've got my parts list. So this gives me all my actual sizes and dimensions. On this side, I've got a full-size layout of the case side. So I can literally drop this in place on this board. And I can see, all right, this is how long it needs to be. I can mark right on my board, and I know that is my final dimension. What I'll do is grab my square, step away from that edge a little bit. First thing we're going to do, check that that's square, and it is not. See? Never assume. Square line across there. Then I'll run my story stick up to that line. And there. Got my little step away from that, maybe a 1/4 inch. Square that across. Drop my story stick down here, and I'm just keeping it a little bit away from my line just because there's going to be a saw curve. There is, this board is laid out and ready to be cut. And what I'm going to do is cut this into parts, match plane it, and glue it into a panel. One of the kind of workflows here is I could mark all of my boards, cut all of my boards into their various rough parts, and then start match planing and gluing it up. But if I do one at a time, match plane it, glue it up, then go back, mark out a board, cut it, match plane and glue it up, you might be surprised how much time will elapse. And you actually, if you're limited on clamps, a lot of times with like tight bond and things like that, it's set up and ready to come out of the clamps 30, maybe 45 minutes later, or an hour later if you want to be really safe. Well, the time that it took you to then go back, start over, cut that down, match plane it, put it together, probably not going to be an hour, but you never know. You might be able to start cycling through clamps. So if you have enough clamps to glue up like 3 panels, but you've got to make 6 panels, by the time you get done with that 3rd panel glued up, the first one's going to be done. So it also kind of keeps you on your toes and keeps you working through a variety of things instead of constant repetition over and over and over again. So I'm going to, the last thing about the story stick is it's just got all the joinery laid out, so I'll continue to use it like you just saw, laying it in place, transferring the marks from my dados, all that. We'll get to that stuff in the next part here. But I'm going to saw this out now. Can I just say I'm having like a serious geek moment right now with this broadcast software I'm using? Allow me to switch cameras and stuff. It's awesome. All right, here's my cut line. Needle on the board. I will always take my sawing knee and tuck it up against the board. Wasn't that easy? Oh, you know what? I should go ahead and cut. Yeah, let me cut this little bit of scrap off this other side here. The boards have been left long enough that I can still trim them. Scrap can go in my fire pit. Okay. Let me do a little bit of camera adjusting here. Give you guys a detail shot. Okay, we now need to begin looking at the grain direction. Again, since I'm going to be painting the exterior, I'm not so much worried about the appearance here, but I do want to make it a little bit easier to plane. So I just cut the board like this. So if you put the board back together, so I want to keep the grain all running in the same direction. So ideally what I should do is take this piece and slide it down alongside. So now the grain's all running in the same direction. Will that work? Well, that's a good clean edge. Planing, that's got a couple of knots in it, but this edge is clean. So I think what I'll do, reassemble the board, slide it down this way. Now I've got a clean edge and a clean edge running against one another. It'll just be a lot easier to plane this way with two knot-free edges. I've got a little bit of a knot just starting to peek into the edge here, but it's not the end of the world. Now the grain is all running in the same direction, so once I've got a panel that's glued up, I can just come in and plane it all the same way. I don't have reversing along the glue line. You know, a lot of people will take a board, cut it off, flip it in for end. Well, now the grain's running the opposite direction. Or if you do kind of the book match idea, if you reset, bring it apart, the grain's running in opposite directions. It's not impossible to plane, it's just it's nicer if you keep it all together, especially when you don't really have to worry about the appearance of that board. So this is how I like it. Pattern maker's triangle, and that tells me it keeps my orientation together. Now, the one thing you'll notice that I have not done is any kind of face planing. No milling whatsoever. Again, I've got S4S stock, right? So, you know, I said that could be an advantage, could be a disadvantage. The disadvantage, obviously, is the boards are already at 3/4 of an inch thick. So if you have to do any milling or thicknessing, now your boards are getting thinner and thinner and thinner. Plus, when these boards are playing down, they're playing relatively quickly. Sometimes the wood's not dried as well. So invariably, you'll get a little bit of cup. I've got a little bit of cup, even a little bit of twist on these boards. But in this case, it's actually an advantage because of how this case is constructed. Let me run back over to this drawing real quick. If you look at the case sides, they come together on dados on the shelf, and they're going to be nailed from the outside of the case with nice decorative nails. So any cup I have will be flattened out as I nail it into the case side. Likewise, any cup that I have in the shelves will be flattened out as I slot it into the dado. So the case construction itself is allowing us to flatten out our boards, and we don't really have to worry about getting them perfectly flat. There's a lot of give in these, especially when you're talking about a 12-inch wide or 13-inch wide case side. There's quite a bit of flex. Just take a board that's that wide with cup and you can press it flat relatively easily. It's not a structural issue that you have to worry about here. It's using it to your advantage. So I could have bought rough sawn stock and then gone through all the steps of milling it out, or I could buy S4S stock, just glue it up, and count on my joinery and my nails and such to hold everything flat. And that's really what's beautiful about boarded furniture, is it's very forgiving in how flat the board is, how much twist it has, because eventually you're going to fasten it all together. Now, severe cup and severe twist might be a bit more of an issue. So before I jump into match planing, I just check out the chat room here. I missed any questions? You know, one thing that can help folks, if you do have questions, put them in all caps. That makes them pop out in the chat a lot more. Anybody who's just joining us, we are building the Anarchist tool or Anarchist design book bookcase, and I'm hopefully going to be building it live over the next 3 days or so. So if you don't know me, I'm Shannon Rogers. I own the Hand Tool School. I run the Renaissance Woodworker. Yeah, what else can I say to that? It's what I do. All right, let's match plane these a little bit. You know what I should do? Whoops. I get my hotkeys right. I should bring like a wireless keyboard down so I can switch cameras like from the bench instead of having to walk over to the computer. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. There you go, I'm geeking out on the tech again. My wood shop is part film studio, part broadcast center now, and a little bit of wood shop thrown in. Let's, I want to get a good view of the leg vise here. Pardon the shaky camera. I should probably be adjusting this while it's on the other view, but so sue me. All right, match planing, if you don't know, is when we rely upon the complementary angles. So I've got the board laid out the way I want it. I can fold it up like a book. I'm going to grab a couple of clamps here. This always makes it a little bit easier. Just take these quick clamps. I'm not really needing a lot of pressure on it. I just want to hold the boards as a unit so they're not slipping around on me. I'm relying upon the bench top just to kind of get them relatively close to one another, but they don't have to be perfectly flush. In fact, it actually can be easier if they're not perfectly flush. In that grain direction. Yeah. Of course I did. They're going the other way, which, just as a little tip, when you use these clamps like this, I always put like the long axis in, otherwise I'm bumping into these clamp bars as I climb. May not seem like much, but damn, it hurts when you bump into them. Alright, the grain is now running towards the camera. Get a better setup here. Higher. There we go. So, I need a joiner plane. If these were roughs on boards, I would probably grab a 4-plane first, but joiner should be plenty fine. Set it for relatively light cut. And let's just see what our edge topography looks like. The boards are actually in really good shape. They're pretty flat. A little bit of a hump in the middle. It's all right. What I'll do is take a couple of passes right in the middle. Now, you notice I'm getting twin shavings coming out of this board because I'm hitting both boards at once. Should have removed that hump. Now I'll come back here and clean it all the way down the boards. Again, I'm looking for those twin shavings. I don't have twin shavings back on this end because this board on the left is actually a little bit higher than the one on the right. I don't like that camera angle, guys. I know I'm being a perfectionist here, sorry. I don't like that either. I know what I need. While we're doing that. Hey Jim. Jim says, what's the max overhang we would recommend for the vise? What do you mean, Jim? Overhang how? Overhang, where is it overhang? You mean around the screw itself? This is, I want to say it's an 8 or 9 inch wide chop and a 1.5 inch screw. So I guess overhang is like either side of that screw is about 4 inches. That's an 8-inch chop, so it's a little less than 4 inches, I guess. I think that's what you mean. I don't know that there is really a max overhang. A lot of that would depend upon the species you're using and the thickness of that chop. I think a lot of people now are using 12-quarter, even 16-quarter big, heavy vise chops. And, they're beveling them down to make them look a little bit thinner, but you've still got a massive amount of wood there. So I've seen 9, 10, I don't think I've even seen any wider than 10-inch wide chops. I'm sure they're out there. I don't think you really have to worry about too much flexing, especially if you go with a 12-quarter hunk of wood there. This was done with a 10-quarter piece of ash. Ash is very hard. So I have no flex whatsoever on the vise. Again, assuming we're talking about the same thing as far as max overhang on the shop. Oh, in use on the board. Oh God, I don't know. A lot. So in other words, at what point is there not, what Jim is asking is I'm clamping in the middle of the board, how long can I overhang the other side and have it still be effective? I've planed 8-foot long boards using one vise chop and have it kind of clamped in the middle, maybe a little off so I've got more on the inboard side of the bench so I'm not running into the wall. I don't do that often. If I have 8-foot boards, a lot of times I'll use, I've got a sliding leg vise that's over on the other side, or I can just use hold fast right to the edge of the bench. But yeah, I rarely need any more than this one vise. It holds incredibly well. Okay, I'm still getting just one shaving. Oh, now I've got 2 shavings down on this end. I believe that is now match planed. Let's just double check, but it felt flat to me. Yeah, it's definitely flat. One thing I will always do, it's now match planed, so I'm now going to back my cut out. I want to take a really light cut. And here's the thing. With any plane, but especially with a joiner because of the long sole, it will make the board flat to within the thickness of the plane shaving, the projection of the blade over the length of the sole, so 22 inches. So if the blade is projecting, a 1/16 of an inch, this board is flat to within a 1/16 of an inch over 22 inches. So this is not a 1/16, it's maybe a 32nd of an inch. I set it heavier to get going faster. Now if I back the blade out and take a really light shaving, you see I'm not getting a full length shaving. I've just changed the tolerance. Now the tolerance is like flat to within probably, I don't know, half a thou over 22 inches. That's really, really flat. I'm going to advance it just a little bit more. And this will give me certainly a better glue surface, but it just ratchets up the flatness just a little bit more. Now I'm getting really wispy shavings, but I'm not quite full length of the board. Oops. There we go. You asked about overhang, it just shifted a little bit there. It wasn't tight all the way. Static electricity. There's something a little bit, I think there's a little dip down here that I don't think will line up. So I'm just going to take a couple more passes. Boy, it's dry on the shop. There we go. Now the plane cut the minute it hit the board all the way to the end. Now, you'll notice I don't care about the angle of this plane. I will always wrap my thumb around the knob and have my fingers trail like this on the board. It's kind of like choking up on a bat. I get better feel for it when my finger's right on the sole. But I could be 45 degrees. I don't care. Because these boards are book matched like this, when they open up, they'll create a complementary angle that will allow the boards to come together cleanly. Let me show you. Oh, you know what? Let's put a spring in this, just so we can use one clamp. So spring joint is you've got a little convexity in the middle. This I definitely would not do with a heavier set on the blade. So this nice little whisper shaving. Go right in the middle, a little pass, step back about, I don't know, 3 inches, make another pass. Then just take one more to unify the whole thing. Let's see how we did. Trevor, hey Trevor, says, I'd like to buy a joiner plane. Would you recommend a low angle or a standard? And why? The answer is yes. I have a low angle plane. I've had it for years. I do really like it. I like the visibility that I get when I'm working on the blade because of that I don't have a frog and everything in the way. The visibility is not that much worse on a bevel down plane. I have kind of, I hate to use the word graduated, but that's how I think of it in my mind. I've kind of graduated to using more bevel down planes. I just like the feel of them a little bit more. You really can't go wrong with one or the other. I mean, I've got a wooden 36-inch long bevel down wooden plane, and I've got, where is it? I've got an old Stanley number 7 that is a bevel down. I work with them all. They all work fantastic. I really can't look at one over the other and say this one outperforms the other. I do find that the bevel up low angle planes tend to be a little bit more user friendly when you're first getting into hand planing. There's no chip breaker. You know, you can change the bevel of the iron and change how it cuts. I do like the adjustable mouth on these, but you can find that on a lot of other planes. So I think from an ease of use, the bevel up, the low angle joiner is a little bit easier to work with. Okay. A pretty good joint. The real test is what it looks like when you put a clamp on it. And ideally, with a spring, I mean, there's very little spring in this. I can't even really see the gap anymore. But what you want to be able to do, any gap you have in the middle, you want to be able to close up with finger pressure. A spring, you might not be able to close with finger pressure with a heavily sprung joint, but still, you get pretty close. Now, I should be able to push that flat, and with one clamp, make sure it's all flat. My panel joint. That looks really good. Nice and tight on the edges. You know what though? It's not as tight as I want it, actually. This is good. This is good. It's good that joints don't all work out perfectly. Now the problem with match planing, if you're not happy with it, and you've got to set it up again, I may not be exactly equal. Yeah, I may not be flush again, so I may have to do a little bit more planing. But I'd rather do a little bit more planing than have, there was a little bit of a divot down on this end, and it was closing up, but it wasn't closing as tight. And with the spring joint, it should close really, really tightly. I can certainly throw another clamp across it, but you know what? Let's do it right. Actually, what I'll do, spring this even a little bit more. Did you hear it skip down at the end there? That's what I'm talking about. Something that was a little off. There we go. Nice consistent shaving. Flat in the middle, a longer flat. One more right in the middle. That actually wasn't too bad. I think I got those pretty close to even. That's the stuff. Nice. You hear that? Nice and firm right on those edges. And now I can see I've got a much more visible joint here. Maybe you can see that. Maybe you can't. There. That's better. It's not quite so blown out now. So there is a visible joint, or a visible gap, I should say, in the middle. And when I bring my clamp in, that gap closes up nicely. And she hootie is that tight on the ends. Very nice. So, one single clamp will glue up this panel. Will that cause problems? In the long run, it might. One single clamp on one side might increase the bow a little bit. Ideally, I've got the clamp, so I could put one down here and one down here on opposite sides. And I'll probably get a little bit better panel joint, but it works this way. I think I will go ahead and use 3 clamps because I've got them right now, but let me, I've got a panel that is sprung right now that I jointed last night. I'll show you that it does actually work. One of those funny things, spring joints, I know they work. I've used them many times before. You know, it's not that I don't trust them, but it's kind of like, hey, you know, I bought money on clamps. I should use them. Like I have clamp remorse. If I don't use my clamps, why did I spend the money on them, right? Certainly there have been times when I've got a lot of panels to glue up. And I've got 3 shelves and 2 case sides to glue up, so that's 5 panels. But in doing a little bit of prep work last night, I've already glued up a case side and I glued up 2 shelves. So at this point, I only have 2 more panels to do. And I've got, if I put 3 clamps on each one, I've got at least that many parallel clamps over there that I can. Get a little detail shot, because who doesn't want to see glue being applied? This is compelling TV here, folks. You can't just log on to any old place and see somebody painting glue on an edge. Only on the Renaissance Woodworker YouTube channel. And the subscriber numbers plummet. Speaking of plummet, the glue brush just plummeted into a pile of sawdust. Fabulous. Now, a lot of spring joints, they'll say, excuse me, it's a rub joint, not a spring joint. With a rub joint, you just rub those together until they start to tack up a little bit, and technically, you could be done. Done that a couple of times, but that I really, start to get a little worried that it's not going to be enough. Got clamps, let's use them. Okay. Now, invariably, once you get glue on the surface, it becomes a lot more slippery, so things will start to slide around on you a little bit. Pulling them flush. The real indicator in one of these is just the solid bead of squeeze out all the way along the board. That tells me I've done my job. Go. A little bit of opposition on the clamping pressure. This helps keep it a little flat. But again, do I care? If it's not perfectly flat, I can clean that up. Just relying upon the joinery. Remove a little bit of the squeeze out. When this dries, I'll be cleaning this up with a cabinet scraper. So if I can avoid a big heavy beaded glue, it just saves my blade a little bit. Since this is painted, I'm not terribly worried about rubbing any glue into the surface. All right, let's set that aside to cook. Now, here is spring joint that I glued up last night. And this is one of the shelf panels. And one clamp in the center. And look, you take the clamp off, the board does not explode. I've got a perfectly glued up panel that I just need to clean up a little bit. So it's like watching a cooking show, right? We put the turkey in the oven and ta-da, now the turkey came out of the oven and it is nice and ready for cleanup. So what I've got is case side and a shelf, actually 2 shelves that are glued up. And what I want to do at this point is clean up the joint, clean up the glue line a little bit, and size them to their final dimension. Well, let's look at some questions here. Jim says, hey, do you always apply glue to both surfaces? For the most part, Jim, I do. I'd say 90% of the time. There are some instances where glue up is, if it's all in grain on one surface, I may not get as much glue on there, but I try to put glue on both surfaces. If I'm gluing like a molding to a case or something, I'm not going to be painting glue along the case side and then glue on the back of the molding, because I want to avoid squeeze out as much as possible. So there are instances where I really don't want very much squeeze out, so I'm putting just a minimal amount of glue on one face, but for the most part, it's pretty much always both surfaces. And if I don't do both surfaces like that molding example, I'm usually nailing it to the case because the nails act like my clamps. So got a little bit of extra, something holding it together there. Scott says, I'm kind of surprised he let glue on his bench. You know what? It's a bench. And you saw I just wiped it off. It's gone. But, I've got chisel marks and drill bit holes. I've got some milk paint over here. It's a bench, man. People ask me, do I finish my workbench? Absolutely. I've got a boiled linseed oil, milk paint, lacquer, shellac, varnish, PVA glue, hide glue, epoxy finish on this. It's just, and then every year, maybe a couple of years, I flatten the whole thing and I have no finish on it anymore. So I'm just not worried about it. Hey folks, just I'm seeing him now, but do me a favor, if you ask questions, put them in all caps. It makes it easier to weed out from the rest of the chat. Hide glue works better than the PVA glue, and it's reversible. I agree, Joseph. I love hide glue. I usually use hide glue. I just didn't plan ahead enough to make up a new batch of it, and my old brown liquid hide glue is it's about 2 months past its expiration. And there's not very much of it left, so hey, I can't be upset. I used almost all of it, but once it goes past its expiration, I just don't want to trust it. So, I love hide glue because it's reversible, certainly. It's a lot more fun to work with. It's transparent to finishes, but because I'm painting this, I'm also not terribly worried about that. So normally I would use hide glue. You don't see the PVA come out very much in my shop, but it is today. Just so that people can say, hey, hide glue is better. And I can say, I agree with you. If you put enough finish on the workbench, little glue isn't a big deal. Very good point, Frank. I appreciate that. It just depends on what kind of finish. If your finish is already glue, you never know. No, Chris, I do not use a wet rag to clean the glue. Sometimes, well, again, because I'm using hide glue most of the time, I usually don't care. Because, well, you know what? Hold that thought, Chris. I'll show you why I don't really care. Make sure I'm not missing any questions. I'll be going back through this too. If I've missed questions, I can certainly reply later on. I can't really reply while I'm in the middle of the stream, but one of the reasons I'm not using wet rag, or for that matter, really caring about what's happening with my squeeze out, is because of what's just about to happen. So I'm going to clean up the panel now. And because this board is already flat, are flat enough for our purposes. I'm just going to focus on the glue joint. Grab a jack plane here, because it's a little bit shorter sole. To get this started, I may switch to the joiner in a second. This joint is almost entirely flush, but it's not perfectly flush. There's a little raised edge right here. And as I plane it, it's going to disappear slowly but surely. But you'll say, well, you're thinning out the middle of that board. Well, yes, I am, but not appreciably. Not to the point where I've got to be worried that, now I'm 3/8 of an inch in the middle. Okay. All the glue is gone from that surface now. I'll hit that side again in just a second. So why would I go to the trouble of wetting a rag? I don't have a faucet in my shop, so I have to, granted it's not that far, it's just go next door to the laundry room. But there's no reason to worry about glue when I'm just going to end up playing it off. Lovely knot. That glue line is now cleaned up. So if I were to, just out of curiosity, 3/4 on the edge, and in the middle, I'm about a 64th of an inch thinner. So to answer the question of, well, aren't you worried about thinning out your board? No, I'm not. It's a 64th of an inch. And remember what I said about the construction method being very forgiving on this particular build. This whole thing is going to be housed in dados. So you're not going to see the end. So say it was an appreciable difference. Say it was a 1/16th of an inch difference. When you slot this in and you look down at this board, if you were to look at this board, the face right now, you would not be able to see that it was thinner in the middle than it is on the sides. You have to pull up and look at the edge to do that. Well, that edge is going to be housed in the dado. Certainly, the dado might have a little bit of a gap in the middle if I went really, really over, if I was a 64th over. But even then, or excuse me, 16th over, even then, it's got to be centered in there to the side, so you're going to see like a 32nd of an inch reveal on the interior of that case, which by the time I put glue in that dado joint and the wood swells up a little bit, it's not going to matter. In our case, it's a 64th of an inch thin, which means once it's centered in there, I'm going to have a 128th of an inch gap in my dado that I guarantee will disappear when I apply glue to it. So just a little shortcut there, if you will. Let me grab my joiner. Just clean this up a little bit. Set that jack plane, it's kind of heavy, so I've just got a few plane tracks on the board that I want to get rid of now. Ooh, staticky. And I might as well get a fresh surface because this has been sitting in a Home Depot bin for Lord knows how long. It's got all kinds of Home Depot grime. Ew, it's the worst kind of grime. Home Depot grime. Hey, I never asked, but how's the audio on this, folks? I'm using a new mixer to pipe my lab mic in. So I should always test before I do stuff, but I assume you guys can hear me okay. Barry Manilow. Oh, Barry, I'm so excited. Barry Manilow was in my chat room, and now it's Barry Manilow. Is that the Hawaiian singer? Barry Maniloa. It's a Texas Heritage apron, by the way, with a custom hand tool school logo and a custom lav mic hole. Just like I said, 50% wood shop, 40% film studio, 10% broadcast studio. A little wonky here on the edge. I'm not terribly concerned about this board being dead flat, especially when I consider that I haven't built the thing to final dimensions yet, which I'm going to do now. There's a trash can down here, by the way, that I'm sweeping this into. I suppose I could just sweep it onto the floor, just considering I miss the floor. I miss the can most of the time. So, alright, we have a shelf that is glued up into a wide panel. I grab my story stick. The shelf is 3/4 by 12.5 by 35 inches. Going to assume what I got here, like 14 inches? Yeah. I need to find a reference edge that I like that's going to stick out. I think I might put like a little beaded edge on the front of this, so I do want to look for something that's a little clear. So you can see I've got 2 knots on this edge, so I'll put that towards the back of the case. This edge is clear. From a face perspective, I like this face up, just appearance entirely. So I'm going to mark the bottom, back. And the reason I mark the bottom and the back is because the bottom faces down and the back goes against the ship-out boards. So I really don't have to worry about cleaning those up. Cleaning up those faces. Just cleaned up this face. And now probably have a straight edge, straight enough anyway, that I can use as a reference, but you know what? It could stand to be a little bit flatter. A tiny bit of a bow on that edge. Hear how it's skipping in the middle like that? It tells me that I've got a valley right there. There we go. There. Nice and flat. Feel that straight edge dragging along the entire edge. And we're square. So, my first edge is going to be my reference edge. I need, what did I say, 12.5 inches wide for the shelf. Now, I'm making the first shelf here. So, the size, now we're saying 12.5 inches to hit the plan. What's important is that not just that I get this width right, but more importantly is that I size all of my subsequent shelves to whatever this width is. So I use the panel gauge, working off that freshly jointed reference edge. Mark that out. I'll always mark on both faces. Helps me later when I'm planing down to that line. So that's our waist. Now, square not long enough. Use this one. I never check my final length. It should be 36 inches. 36 inches. Final shelf length is 35 inches, so I've got an inch to play with. Do is mark a square edge there. Down here, 35. And again, I don't have to be super exact here. You may be thinking, well, I was just using pencil. The key is not so much getting this size right, but getting all of the shelves to match this size. Shelves in a bookcase move independently. So it's not like if I made this 33 inches, then the case would just be 33 inches wide instead of 35 inches. Well, plus the case thickness. The key is getting them all exactly the same length. So, yeah, just for giggles, let's go ahead and transfer these lines along the edges. I do want to keep them square if I can. Although, honestly, I'll probably end up shooting this panel. Helps. The more accurate my saw cut is, the less planing I have to do later. Chris, I'm not sure. Chris says, shouldn't you say length by width by thickness? Oh, okay, there's the emoji. I was going to say, are you a Wood Talk listener that's giving me a hard time? Because don't make me beat you down with the whole thickness by width by length. Don't be Mark Spagnuolo, people, because he's wrong. Length by width by thickness. Whatever that's all about. Length by thickness by width, is that what Mark says? That's just dumb. It's just dumb. Okay, let's get a rip saw. And this board is already a final thickness. It's 3/4 of an inch, so I'm not going to use my normal, like the 5 points per inch saw that I would normally use here because it's just too coarse. And I'd like to keep as clean cut as possible. Back things up a little bit. Top feet support here. Yeah. So this is a 6 points per inch rip saw. I suppose I could actually go even finer than that. And go to a panel saw. You can leave how much buffer you want. I'm just going to saw a hair away from my line. Okay, and I mark my line on both faces so I can flip it over and see, okay, I'm still away from my line there. It felt like a square cut, sounded like a square cut, so I'm assuming it is a square cut. I can be really laissez-faire about stuff like this because it just doesn't matter. I don't obsess over perfectly straight and square lines on a case like this just because of how forgiving the design is. And when I'm sawing like this, it's sure nice to hit everything square. You know what? I am going to use a finer saw here. It's a more aggressive crosscut saw. Slow things down a bit, but this finer panel saw is just going to do a much cleaner job. Okay, it's not that much slower. You gotta love working in pine. One of the reasons that I want a finer cut here and I'm gonna cut closer to my line is because ingrain's more of a pain in the butt. And if I'm gonna shoot this, I don't wanna have to shoot away, a quarter of an inch. I wanna be able to shoot this in a couple of passes. So the closer I can get to that line now, less time I'll spend futzing around with a shooting board. Anybody who's ever wondered, when you hear me rant about panel saws and hand saws and the differences, that is where a panel saw is really nice. On a panel that's already 2 3/4 inch thickness, where I want a little bit finer cut, less splintering on the backside of that cut. All right, there is a board. It's ready to be sized. Rip saw out of the way. Does the design, Scott, hi Scott, does the design call for a through or stopped dado? I don't think so. Wait, well, no, it could. Well, okay. No stop dados, no. The dados are all through. It does call for a stopped groove. I guess one could call this a gain. It's open on the tops for the top board. It's open on the top and it stops the bottom of that board. So there's a stopped groove. The kick plate, Chris Schwarz calls for it to just be nailed in place. So there's no groove here. It's literally just a butt joint with a nail. One of my hand tool school members just finished building this case, and he actually had a little bit of problem with that, and he said if I were to do it again, I would actually house that kick plate. I may just do that. One of the reasons that the kick plate was left just with nails is because it got kicked. It often needed to be replaced. It got bumped into, it got kicked, it got run into with a vacuum, and it would need to be replaced over time. If it's housed in joints, you're never going to get it out of there. But if it's just nailed in place, you could actually get it out of there. You could even clip off the nails and work it out of there, slide into it in place, and nail it back in place. So the kick plate is designed to fail, in other words. But, I don't know. It's one of those things where why improve upon something that, there was a definite reason for it back then. It's kind of like bracket feet on cases. They're really almost designed to fail. That's why we screw them to a bottom of a case so that you can repair them later. I don't know. I'm still, the verdict's out on that for me. Cutting the extra joinery is just going to take more time. So we'll see how I'm doing when it comes to the assembly phase here. All right, I need to joint that edge. The grain is running up this way. There. Should be relatively flat here. Yeah, looks pretty good. A bit of a divot right here at the end of the cut where it kind of split out right at the end. Speed this up. I need to take a wispy shaving. There we go. A little bit of a divot right there. Now ultimately, I don't have to worry so much about flat, I have to worry about my lines. I'm working 2 lines here. technically it would be more efficient to do this with the jack plane. When I'm kind of spot planing like this and working down two specific lines, the long sole of the joiner can actually get in the way. It can lift it out of the cut. Why talk about it? Just do it. So I'm just spot tackling certain areas here. I don't need the long reference sole of the joiner getting in the way as I'm bringing this down. Right to my line, and now I should be able to come back with the joiner and take a complete shape. You see how that extra length kind of was interfering, it was lifting the blade out of the cut because it wasn't perfectly even, it just needed to be evened up. So now, to my lines on both faces, which means, ideally, I should have a parallel board, right? 12 and a half, 12 and a half, 12 and a half. Ta-da! We have a 12.5 inch wide board. So the first shelf is sized as we need it. Now I'm going to have some fun. A panel shooting board. Yes. For a wide panel like this, I've got this useful outfeed piece here. Okay, time for luxury tool extraordinaire. The Veritas joiner plane, shooting board plane. Love it. Love it. How am I avoiding blowout when planing to the very end? On the long grain edge, there is no blowout because I'm working with the grain. Are you talking about the shooting edge? When I'm joining the edge, there's not going to be any blowout because I'm working with the grain. Where you have to worry about blowout is when you work across the grain. And how I avoid that here is because I've got the fence set up right. Oh, you dingbat. You just removed your line. All right, so the back here, where I just jointed. My reference surface is right up front. So in this case, as I'm jointing this board, the fence is backing it up. Here, let me get you a better angle. Jim, no left-handed shooting board. No, sorry. Call it a relic of days before guys started making like fancy shooting planes and things like that, and really all I could find was right-handed planes. I learned to shoot right-handed. Always been that way. Figured there was no need to go switch things up on me. So even the super shoot that I have from Tico Vote 2 Works, is right-handed. So when I finally broke down and decided to buy this super fancy plane, I just went ahead and bought a right-handed model. One thing I haven't done yet is put the little outrigger thing on this. Probably should do that, because when there's the outrigger in place, I can just grab right back here. I can do that. Okay. It's nice when it's actually riding in a chute. Got a bit of a low spot right in the middle. I do believe that I might need to sharpen my blade a little bit. There What is my length? What did I say, 35 inches? Because I'm at 35 inches. God. That doesn't happen, folks, where you just accidentally land exactly where you need to be. Yeah, shelves are 35 inches. Beautiful. So this is now sized where it needs to be. Now, I do that not to get a perfectly clean in-grain surface. I don't care. That's going to be housed in the joint. What I care about is that this is flat and square so that it nestles in the dado properly. And of course, I want to get it to a final length that is consistent. So just double check. This end, I'm 35. And this edge, I am 35. I have an S6S board that is now ready to be duplicated. So here's what I do. This is what I'll do for the remainder of these parts. I will go through that exact same process for the case side, obviously working just slightly different dimensions. And once I get my master board, this is the board that, overhead lights blowing things out. This is the board by which all others will be judged. So I have another shelf, right? This one's already been glued up. I would go through the process of removing the glue line like I did earlier, just kind of working those faces flat. I would joint one edge. And then I would line those edges up. I'm not going to worry too much about lining up the ends because I'd rather actually saw those off, work from there. And actually, in this particular board, if you look, I've got a knot right down on this end. Here, let me flip it around. See that big nasty knot right there? I want to avoid that if at all possible. So I'm going to stack my board as close to this edge as I dare, and I pretty much avoid it. Got just a last little bit there, but I'm getting rid of that crack in the middle. So I don't even have to joint the front edge if I don't want. I could literally just line this end, but it's just easier as a reference. If that edge is jointed, this edge is lined up. I can come in here, use a sharp pencil, or if you want, you can use a knife and plane down your knife lines. Again, because this design is a little bit more forgiving, I think I can get away with just working to a pencil line. Now, obviously, I need to clean up the faces first, because I'm just going to remove these lines when I do that. But this master shelf is what I will continually use to lay out the other two. That way I ensure that all the shelves are the same. And when I'm actually going through the process of planing these boards down, again, I'm just working to pencil lines, so that's not as accurate as a knife line, but what's more accurate than a knife line is my fingers. I can lay my master board on top and just feel the edge. Okay, that's flush. Okay, is this edge flush? Is this edge flush? I'm told that your fingers can feel a thousandth of an inch difference. Well, that's good enough for me, frankly. So just trust your fingers. That's why I just say go to the pencil line. If I grab a knife, sometimes the knife can be hard to see, then I got to darken in my knife line. It's just an extra step. Just use a sharp pencil and go to town and trust your fingers to get that right. So that is where I'm going to stop today. The process is just repetition. Off camera, I will be gluing up one more case or one more shelf. I will be sizing two shelves to final dimension. I'll be sizing the master case side and then sizing its duplicate on the other face. When I come back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, we'll start talking joinery. So just want to take a second and we can address some questions. I don't have to run out. I just don't want to spend too much more time droning on. Mr. Kobe, did I answer your question about avoiding blowout when planing to the very end?
You saw both cross grain and long grain there, so you should have a good feel of how I avoid that. I just don't worry about blowout. And one other thing, if you're really worried about blowout when you're shooting the end, leave the long edge to later. So I could shoot the edges first, and if I get blowout, then I'm going to come back and clean up any blowout by jointing that long edge later, because you can't get blowout on long grain, assuming you're planing with the grain. You go against the grain, you can certainly get blowout. So if I didn't answer your question, let me know, but I think we got to that. Jim, what is the smallest dimension you work to? So as far as like, like on my ruler, this little ruler goes down to a 64th of an inch. It's a 32nd on one side, 64th on the other side. This one is the same way. Honestly, I have 20/20 corrective vision. I have trouble seeing the 64th of an inch. I don't work to a 64th. Usually a 16th is fine. A 32nd, it will vary depending on what I'm trying to do. When I'm working shelves that all need to be the same so that the case comes together, I'll get pretty exact. 32nd is pretty good, but as I said before, really I'm working to the thousandths of an inch because I'm using my fingers to line that up. So I'm not really paying attention to the ruler at that point. So I guess the real answer is probably a 16th of an inch, and where it really counts, my fingers. So thousandth of an inch is what I'm working to. You'll find that very rarely these get like used as reference, not so much, oh, this is 13/32. It's more of, okay, I'm in the ballpark, let me work down to whatever size I'm trying to fit. You'll see that when I do the dados, that I'll be laying out the dados based upon the boards that I've already dimensioned, and each dado individually, in case those boards are slightly different in thickness, because that's what happens. I skipped all that milling part by buying S4S lumber, but if I milled that all by hand, there's every possibility that those boards will be in varying thickness, maybe even varying thickness across the width of the board, because dead flat is a relative state of mind. And when you're working entirely by hand and trying to move through it as quickly as you can, we don't need to hold to the same rigid, strenuous tolerances that the power tool world has beat into our head. G1 Pete, I like that name. Any concerns about wood movement on the wide panels? Absolutely not. And Pete, I don't know when you came into this discussion, but it is one of the things about this design that's wonderful. There you can see your overall design. The wood movement that I might get on those panels, any cupping will be pulled flat as I nail those case sides to the dados. Any cupping on the shelves will be flattened out as I slide those shelves into the dados. Now, any wood movement, expansion and contraction across the width, is negligible, because if you look at the design, the case sides are, this is a shelf, but we're going to assume it's a case side. The grain is going to expand and contract across the width, so it's going to expand and contract this way. The shelf that goes in at 90 degrees is oriented the same way, so it's going to expand and contract the same way. So I drop this in a dado, I could actually glue the entire dado in place, and these boards are going to expand and contract in the same direction. They're the same species, so they should expand and contract in the same amount as well. Now, there may be differences in moisture, there may be differences there, but that's totally negligible. The boards, the case is aligned to be all running in the same direction, so there's no need to worry about that. The backboard will expand and contract across its width, the top board I should say, across its width. I'm pointing to it on my screen, can't you guys see that? That top board there is going to expand and contract across its width. The only thing it will do is it'll be stopped by that stop groove, and it could expand just past the top of the case, so it may not be flush part of the year. The backer boards are shiplap. They allow for expansion and contraction along the shiplap joint. So, long story short, no. I'm not worried about wood movement in the slightest. That's the brilliance of a good design like this. And boarded furniture in general is designed this way to really just slap it together. There was no thought whatsoever about wood movement. Who cares? It could be different species. Any movement's going to be negligible. I could even skip the glue and nail it all together, and the nails will shift with expansion and contraction. It shouldn't be necessary because everything's moving in concert. Big Fat Tonys. Do you find the blade registering set screws in the Veritas planes to be useful or more Rube Goldberg? Love it. When I first bought them, I was like, yes, set screws, totally repeatable, it's great. 10 years later, Rube Goldberg. I shouldn't say Rube Goldberg. I mean, they're nice. They can get you in the ballpark, but it doesn't, you still have to do some lateral adjustment when you put the blade back in. Those set screws do not put it back in and get it perfectly aligned parallel. It just gets you in the ballpark. So I suppose it's nice over like an old Stanley plane that doesn't have that and the mouth is a little bit more wide open, but it definitely is not a substitute for proper setup. Putting it back in, tightening it down, checking that it's parallel with the lateral adjuster, and then going from there. Those set screws do not allow you to avoid that. Hey, thanks everybody who showed up and who are leaving right now. Good turnout. Let's see. Carl says, if you're going to be chamfering the underside of the top, do you hit long grain or in grain first? Underside of the top. The top of what? I'm going to be chamfering the underside. Oh, just like in general, like the top of a table. I would hit the in grain first. I would chamfer the in grain first, and then I would come back with a long grain. And what that does is clean up any particular like splintering across the grain. So in grain, or cross grain, I should say, and then long grain to clean it up. We just had an ice storm start out the window. It's like clickety-clackety as ice pellets fall down. It's great. Jason says, I'd love to see this format used to make a finer piece of furniture. Yeah, definitely. This is something I want to do more of. I will probably do another one. I've got a step stool that people have been bugging me about for years. I guess technically it's in the shaker style, but it's contemporary shaker with compound through mortise and tenons and things like that I'm going to be building. I'll probably be doing that a little bit later this year, but I definitely want to do more of this. This is fun. I enjoy this. Jim says, I hand planed my coffee table top, and if anyone ever checked it with a machine straight edge, I would just slap them. Damn right. You know, especially underneath, little scallops, edges and stuff. This is the thing that I have found to be so liberating about switching entirely to hand tools, is I just don't pay attention to that stuff anymore. There's flat and then there's flat-ish. How flat is flat enough? It depends upon the piece. It depends upon what you're building. But 9 3/4 out of 10, flat looks pretty flat to me, frankly. And in something like this case where we're relying on the joiner to flatten things out, or a little bit finer piece of furniture, we're relying upon external points like breadboards to flatten it out. This wide curly cherry board, oh, it's got to cut. There's no way around it because I've been working on the damn thing forever. And the seasons have changed since I built this panel. It has cupped on me, but that ain't cut. That is flat because those breadboards have held it. Now, and those breadboards aren't even secured in place. That's what breadboards do. They hold it flat. And they allow for expansion and contraction because of the elongated points here. So this is just one of those things where wood is going to move. Wood is going to cut. So don't worry about it. Don't stress over it. Build around it and deal with it. Keep rid of the PVA glue bottle. Appreciate that, Jason. I got a glue pot over in the corner. It's just not on right now. Todd says, you're doing this over a couple of days. Do you have much warping? Probably. But again, I don't care. Because the case is going to be flattening out any of that warping. Which is not really an issue. The length of the pieces are not long enough that we're going to get any appreciable bow over the 32-inch or 35-inch long shelf. Any bow that would happen along the length of the 46-inch side is going to be nailed out. So I don't really care. I probably won't get much movement anyway, just because it's winter. The heater's running. I don't even know if you guys can hear that. I had a noise gate on here to get rid of that hum, but there is a heater running on the floor back there that keeps it relatively warm based upon how easy it is to pull my Lee Nielsen socket handle chisels out. It's dry in here because those have shrunk up quite a bit. There, that's better. So I don't think I'm going to see much movement at all, but again, I don't really care. Piphalus, the Greek philosopher Piphalus. Are these live feeds possible to see afterwards? I won't be able to see tomorrow's live broadcast. I enjoyed. Yes, absolutely. They'll be available to watch live. These just become part of my channel. I'll build a playlist for them. I'm also going to embed them on my website and blog posts, so they will certainly be there. Rob wants to know more of the video setup for this stream. Absolutely. One thing before I lose too many people, because I am a marketing guy and I gotta throw it in there. You guys hear me talk about the hand tool school? This build was born out of the community. I'm having a sale right now. So anybody who's interested in joining the hand tool school, you can get 30% off everything right now when you use that code Snowpocalypse. That runs through next Friday the 20th. You can use that code. A lot of people are taking me up on it. I love it. I'd love to have you join the hand tool school. I'd love to have you join the community we've got going over there, because I personally, I'm biased, but I think it's the coolest place on the internet. It's easily one of the most passionate and supportive groups of people that I've ever worked with. You join, and within minutes, you've got 20, 30 people saying, hi, what are you up to? What are you working on? You got a problem, you post it in the community, you've got 20 answers. Most of the time, I'm the 30th answer because these guys get there faster than I do. It's a great place. So, I got to throw that call to action in the marketing one more time. If anybody's interested, now is a good time to join, because I probably won't be having a sale for at least till this time next year anyway. So, Rob, as far as the video setup here, what you're looking at right now is actually the built-in laptop camera on my MacBook Pro. It's the FaceTime camera. This angle is a Logitech camera. Set on a GorillaPod. This Logitech 930, great webcam. And, all these other scenes, if you will, are just pre-composed. I pulled in the image there, I pulled in the graphic and the text over on the side. I just pulled in an image in this particular case. So what allows me to do all this is a piece of software called OBS, Open Broadcasting Software. That's what is actually creating the stream that is being sent to YouTube's encoder right now. So YouTube is streaming it to you guys. They're doing all the compression, the encoding. This is in 720p right now. I have a USB XLR input, which is caught on my fret saw right now. Watch me sever the cord on a fret saw. I have a USB to XLR input into my Sennheiser lav mic. That's the transceiver, and my receiver is in my back pocket talking to this lav. So that is, I've also got a little bit of the auxiliary, just ambient sound on from the actual built-in mic on the laptop. All of this is then mixed together in the OBS software, and all of the switching that you see here, this is just done with a various variety of hotkeys that I've pre-programmed in, and allows me to throw up cool graphics like that and switch cameras. Technically, I get out as many scenes as I want. I was set up to actually run a separate webcam. I could even pipe my Canon camcorder into this if I want, but you need a little bit of extra stuff. So it's very cool. It's fun stuff. Torzan, hi from Sweden. Hi from Maryland. Do you have any Swedish Mora carving knives? I have a Mora Sloyd knife that I use for spoon carving and just general kind of green woodwork. You see, Mora from Sweden. I like it. Also got some carving knives from Great Britain, and I like them a lot. Oh, sorry. Harry has a question. Have I done anything with the knots? No. I mean, part of it was I picked boards with sound tight knots. This particular board was a knot right here. There's a couple knots there. There's a little bit of fuzziness, a little bit of tearing on the in grain, or the inboard side, because I'm playing against the grain there. I can clean that up later when I'll come back with a smoothing plane, but I'm not terribly worried about that at this particular stage. A little bit of tearing right there as we come off that knot. But yeah, this pith is a little punky, so I might get a little bit of tearing there, but that's all stuff for before we begin to put finish on. I'll hit everything with a smoothing plane. That should be, I'll be covering that on Monday. So, did I miss any questions? I don't think so. All right, folks. Well, I'm going to kill the stream and get to work finishing the rest of those boards. I will be back at 11 o'clock tomorrow I may do a little bit of kind of ad hoc streaming throughout the day. So if you follow a Renaissance Woodworker on Facebook, my page on Facebook, I'll be streaming to Facebook Live, maybe to Instagram. I'm not really sure. Renaissance Woodworker at Instagram. I should make a graphic for that. That'd be good. But anyway, I'll be around. Certainly, I'll be here at 11 o'clock tomorrow if you want to watch joinery. We'll be cutting dados and grooves and shiplap joinery. And ideally, we'll be ready to assemble by Monday and maybe put some paint on. Very cool. Alrighty, folks. Thanks for coming out. I really appreciate it. And I will see you tomorrow.